tissues and crying and crying. And then I thought, look, I've got to get a grip here and do something useful for Diana. And I decided the first thing that needed to be done was to find somebody to write and deliver the eulogy.
For nearly 3 decades, the world was force-fed a simple, comfortable narrative. Diana, the vulnerable, fiercely protective people's princess, and Anne, the crown's stoic, unyielding iron anchor, were bitter, irreconcilable enemies. They were fire and ice. They were oil and water. The tabloids swore they despised each other until the very end. That narrative was an absolute lie.
For over 2 decades, one letter remained sealed in the Spencer family archives, a deeply personal message from Princess Diana to the sister she barely knew. But when Charles Spencer finally opened it, the contents revealed a side of Diana the world had never seen. What she confessed in those handwritten words would challenge everything we thought we knew about the royal family. This discovery would ultimately become one of the most significant revelations about Princess Diana since her death, offering unprecedented insight into her emotional world and her private struggles within the institution that defined her life.
When Earl Charles Spencer stunned the entire United Kingdom by revealing a lost letter written by Princess Diana to Princess Anne, he shattered 25 years of deeply guarded royal history with a single, unbroken crimson wax seal. The frantic, desperate handwriting uncovered inside a dusty estate library completely destroys that illusion with devastating psychological weight. Why would a terrified, isolated Princess Diana secretly reach out to her supposed greatest rival just weeks before her tragic death in Paris? What chilling, calculated plea was trapped inside that intact wax seal? And why did Charles Spencer wait until this exact moment to expose a truth that changes everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor? I have spent years tracking the paper trails, the quiet whispers, and the hidden mechanics of monarchical power. But what emerged from the east wing of Althorp House is unlike anything the public was ever meant to see. It began in the heavy, centuries-old quiet of the estate reading room. Sunlight cut through tall, mullioned windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust over rows of ancient, leather-bound spines. Hi viewers, if you were facing a terrifying crisis alone, would you trust family or an outsider to protect your children? Comment below with family or outsider and hit that subscribe button and join our community right here as this story unfolds. Earl Charles Spencer stood near the towering mahogany shelves holding a routine estate audit ledger. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon cataloguing 17th century collections. He reached for a worn, olive-green spine, a copy of John Donne's Holy Sonnets, a volume untouched for nearly 30 years. He remembered that exact book in the hands of his late sister. It was her quiet sanctuary during those turbulent final months. A place to hide when the press grew too loud and the palace walls felt dangerously narrow. As his fingers brushed the fragile binding, something heavy shifted inside the crisp, aged paper. A dense, cream-colored envelope slipped free. It struck the Persian rug with a soft, dull thud. The air in the library seemed to vanish instantly. Charles dropped to his knees. His joints protested. He picked up the paper, protected from decay by the poetry volume. He turned it over. The wax seal on the back, a deep, bruised crimson, was perfectly intact. The lost letter had never been opened. It had never been sent. Then came the detail that made the heavy audit ledger slip from his fingers and crash loudly against the wooden floorboards. The handwriting on the front, it was her distinct, looping cursive, hurried, frantic, yet entirely deliberate, a ghost speaking directly from across 25 long years. Charles braced himself. He expected to see his own name, or her young sons, William and Harry, or perhaps a final, scathing parting shot aimed at the institutional machine that had suffocated her. Instead, the ink spelled out 4 words that shattered modern royal history: to Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, Anne. Charles stared at those letters as his mind reeled. Here, hidden in the deep shadows of Althorp, was a secret missive penned in Diana's final, darkest days, addressed to the one woman she supposedly viewed as her ultimate rival. A micro-decision flashed through his mind. Lock it away forever, or open it and risk tearing down the carefully constructed curtain? He ran his thumb over the crimson crest. The 90-room estate suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He was an aristocrat, surrounded by a £100 million legacy of Van Dyck paintings and priceless antiquities. Yet in this moment, he was reduced to a helpless younger brother, staring at a ghost. A hesitant voice broke the silence. "My lord?" Thomas, the estate's senior archivist, stood near the mahogany double doors holding a gilded tray of cataloguing tools. His eyes fixed on the pale, stricken face of the Earl. His gaze locked onto the cream-coloured envelope before Charles could conceal it. "Leave the room, Thomas," Charles whispered, his voice cracking. The archivist asked if there was an inventory error. Charles interrupted, his tone hardening into an unyielding command. "Shut the doors and ensure absolutely no one enters the east wing." As the heavy oak doors clicked shut, locking him in isolation, Charles sank into a high-backed leather chair. The golden light cast long, ominous shadows across the floorboards, mirroring the stifling darkness of August 1997. It had been a sweltering summer. Diana, stripped of her HRH status, had retreated to these very walls. She was a billionaire's obsession and the paparazzi's greatest prize. Yet her vast wealth, her Kensington Palace apartments, and her iconic sapphire rings offered zero armor against the establishment. She paced the sprawling corridors of Althorp, her eyes darting toward the windows, trusting no one. Her phones were tapped, her inner circle was leaking. The only thing she valued more than her own survival was the physical and emotional safety of her boys. She needed an ally inside the machine, not a soft confidant, but an impenetrable fortress. Sitting in the library, the logic of her hiding place clicked into terrifying focus. Charles remembered a tense, icy Christmas dinner at Sandringham years earlier. Diana sat isolated at the edge of the sprawling dining table. When a manipulative courtier tried to corner her, Anne stepped in, quoting a line of Donne's poetry to completely silence the official. Diana had looked up, her expression shifting from misery to acute observation. She saw the armor. She saw the one woman who could bend courtiers without ever breaking. With white knuckles, Charles broke the wax seal. The crisp crack echoed through the room like a gunshot. He unfolded the heavy parchment. The scent of aged paper filled the air. "My dearest Anne," the letter began. The words pressed deep into the page, written by a mother running out of time. "They are going to try to break my boys, and I know you are the only one who knows how to survive them." Charles stopped breathing. He flipped to the second page, scanning the ink frantically as his heart hammered against his ribs. Scrawled at the very bottom margin was a name, not a family member, but a shadow. One of the senior courtiers, Diana privately called the men in grey. This specific official had been quietly appointed to oversee William's integration just weeks before the crash. Diana warned that this man's explicit mandate was to strip William of his mother's empathy, molding him into an unfeeling institutional asset. Blood drained from Charles's face. He slammed the book shut, dust billowing into the sunlight. He knew Fleet Street would butcher this, turning a mother's desperate battlefield strategy into a sensational tabloid war. There was only one way to honor the wax seal he had broken. He had to look into the eyes of the Iron Fortress herself. Reaching across his desk, Charles picked up the heavy secure landline and dialed a private Buckingham Palace routing number. Memories flashed through his mind. 1974, when a gunman tried to kidnap Princess Anne. Staring down the barrel of a gun, Anne calmly said, "Not bloody likely." That was the moment Diana realized the truth. While others hid behind palace gates, Anne was the gate. She was bulletproof, and William needed a bulletproof vest. "Equerry to the Princess Royal, state your business," a crisp voice answered. "This is Earl Spencer," Charles said, his voice razor-sharp. "I require an immediate, off-the-books audience with Her Royal Highness at Gatcombe Park." "My lord, her schedule is locked for weeks." "Tell her," Charles interrupted. that I am standing in my library holding a letter with a red wax seal dated August 1997. Tell her it is from Diana. The line went dead silent. 10 agonizing seconds passed. Then a cold, authoritative voice came on. Tomorrow at dawn, West Service Gates. Speak to no one. 14 hours later, Charles's Range Rover crunched over frozen gravel at Gatcombe Park, Anne's private country estate. The sprawling manor was shrouded in pre-dawn fog. Ushered through heavy service doors into a Spartan study that smelled of leather and hunting dogs, Charles saw a figure by the unlit fireplace, her back turned. I was told you destroyed everything she left at Althorp to keep the press away, Anne said, her voice cutting like a blade. I missed one, Charles replied, placing the cream-colored envelope on the oak table. Anne turned, her posture rigid, but as her gaze locked onto the desperate handwriting, the iron mask fractured. She took a sharp, jagged breath, looking up with a secret so heavy it threatened to bring the entire institution to its knees. What chilling truth had Princess Diana uncovered in her final hours, and how were these two unlikely allies about to turn a lost letter into the ultimate weapon? The freezing morning air inside Gatcombe Park felt heavy enough to crush a man. Standing across from Princess Anne, watching her calloused hands trace the broken crimson wax of that cream-colored parchment, I realized something vital about the dark mechanics of royal power. History is rarely written by the people who live it. It is written by the survivors who keep the receipts. To understand why Princess Diana entrusted her final, most dangerous secret to her supposed greatest rival, you have to throw away every tabloid headline you have ever read. You have to look beneath the noise. Why would a terrified mother, running out of time in the summer of 1997, write to the one woman the press claimed she hated? The answer lies in a series of hidden encounters that the public was never meant to discover. It began with a book of poetry, John Donne's Holy Sonnets. Why would Diana hide her desperate message inside a 17th century poetry volume resting on a dusty shelf at Althorp House? Because that book was a secret code between two women who understood the price of survival. Years earlier, during a suffocating Christmas dinner at Sandringham Estate, the atmosphere inside the grand dining room was thick with tension. The Queen presided over a diamond-draped family, but Diana sat isolated near the far edge of the sprawling mahogany table. A senior courtier leaned over Diana's shoulder. He was whispering manipulative, probing questions about her private life, trying to trap her into a mistake. Diana sat frozen, her chest tightening with panic. Then came a sharp, sudden shift in the room. Princess Anne, dripping in inherited sapphires but utterly indifferent to the spectacle, leaned across the table. She did not yell. She did not yell. She did not yell. She simply looked the courtier in the eye and calmly quoted a line of Donne's poetry, instantly cutting the official down and silencing him in front of the entire family. Diana looked up. Her blue eyes shifted instantly from misery to acute, calculating observation. In that quiet second, Diana saw the armor. She saw the one woman who could bend the courtiers to her will without ever letting them break her. Look closely at the history. In 1974, an armed gunman stopped Princess Anne's car on the streets of London, shooting her bodyguard and ordering the 23-year-old princess out at gunpoint. While the nation watched in terror, Anne stared down the barrel of that weapon and calmly replied, "Not bloody likely." When Diana later paced the manicured gardens of Althorp, terrified of the shadowy forces watching her every move, she whispered a secret truth to her brother Charles. She said that while the rest of the royal family hid behind palace gates, Anne was the gate. Anne was bulletproof, and William needed a bulletproof vest. That dynamic reached its absolute peak during the bitter winter of 1992 at Balmoral Castle. It was the height of the War of the Waleses. Tabloid cameras captured footage of Anne completely ignoring Diana on the granite steps of the castle, turning away in what the press called an icy public freezing. The entire world believed they despised one another. That was the illusion. What the cameras never saw happened at midnight in a darkened drawing room deep within the castle walls. A weeping, exhausted Diana was cornered by two powerful senior royal aides. They were demanding she immediately sign over primary authority regarding Prince William's boarding school schedule, effectively stripping her of her maternal control. Diana was trembling, backed into a corner. Suddenly, a sharp figure materialized from the shadows of the doorway. It was Princess Anne. She stepped into the room with an authority so absolute that the two senior aides physically backed away in fear. "You do not touch the mother of the future king," Anne hissed at them, her voice laced with pure venom. She dismissed the men on the spot. Then she turned to a shaking Diana, stepped close, and whispered a piece of advice that would define the rest of Diana's life. "Never let them see you bleed." Diana never forgot who stood in the dark to protect her. Power doesn't scream, it waits. Which brings us back to the freezing study at Gatcombe Park, where Princess Anne stood staring at the cream-coloured parchment. The iron mask had completely fallen away. As her eyes reached the bottom of the first page, where Diana had named the senior courtier, the man privately dubbed one of the men in grey, the colour drained from Anne's face. She staggered backward, her riding boots scraping harshly against the stone floor. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a horrified gasp. "The man she named," Anne whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of immense grief and terrifying rage. She looked directly into Charles Spencer's eyes. The temperature in the room plummeted. Anne revealed the sickening truth. The senior courtier named in Diana's warning, the man appointed to isolate William and break his empathetic spirit, was the exact same official who unexpectedly altered Diana's security protocols the night she drove into that Paris tunnel. Let that sink in. The architect of William's emotional isolation was the architect of his mother's vulnerability. Charles Spencer stumbled backward, his shoulders slamming against the heavy oak bookshelves as the blood roared in his ears. For 25 years, the world blamed paparazzi, reckless drivers, and tragic misfortune. But the frantic ink on that paper had just redrawn the map of Diana's final hours. Anne confessed the unbearable weight she had carried for a quarter of a century. Without hard proof, confronting those shadow courtiers in 1997 would have meant her immediate banishment from William and Harry's lives. She had to make a chilling choice: play the cold, unfeeling royal aunt to stay inside the gates, or burn the castle down and leave the boys completely undefended. So she played the long game. She quietly purged that courtier from William's household weeks after the funeral, reassigning him to a distant post. She neutralized him, but she could not destroy the system without a smoking gun. Now, standing in that cold room, holding Diana's lost letter, she finally had the proof. If you think this investigation ends inside the walls of Gatcombe Park, you are dead wrong. What happened next is a moment so shocking, so unprecedented in modern history, that it threatens to destroy the very foundation of the monarchy. As Anne prepared her next move, the encrypted red telephone, sitting in the darkest corner of her desk, began to ring with a terrifying, mechanical scream. The palace handlers already knew they had the letter, and in the next video, you will witness the exact moment Prince William arrives unescorted through the fog, reads his mother's final desperate words, and joins Anne in executing an explosive, unedited live broadcast exposure play at Windsor Castle that you cannot afford to miss. The red phone kept screaming. It was a heavy rotary landline sitting in the darkest corner of Princess Anne's mahogany desk, wired directly into the highest, most secretive channels of palace security operations. Ring, ring. Each shrill bell echoed off the cold stone walls of Gatcombe Park like an alarm, warning us that our time had just run out. Charles Spencer stared at the flashing light on the receiver, his hands shaking, his aristocratic composure entirely destroyed. I watched Princess Anne. She did not flinch. She simply stood frozen by the cold fireplace, her piercing eyes locked on that phone with the icy, calculating focus of a military commander calculating her next tactical move. She knew who was on the line. So did I. It was the same shadowy group of senior courtiers who had tried to take control of Prince William and Prince Harry in the chaotic hours after the Paris crash. How did they find out so fast? How did a secret buried inside an olive green poetry book for 25 years suddenly set off alarms in London within hours? The answer was standing right in the east wing of Althorp House. Thomas, the senior estate archivist. Think back to the moment the letter fell from John Donne's holy sonnets. The heavy paper struck the Persian rug with a dull thud. Before Charles could even process the looping cursive on the front, the double doors parted. Thomas stood there holding a gilded tray of cataloguing tools. He wasn't performing a routine audit. He was watching. Thomas reported directly to the Crown Estate's Historical Preservation Committee, a bureaucratic body controlled by the very courtiers Diana feared. Within 5 minutes of Charles driving his Range Rover through the Althorp gates, Thomas made a call to London. He confirmed that the Earl had uncovered something ancient, something protected, something he was never supposed to find. Look at the terrifying efficiency of this machine. When Princess Diana died in August 1997, senior palace aides swept her Kensington Palace apartments clean within hours. They confiscated private journals, they removed personal audio tapes, they seized letters, they erased every trace of her personal narrative before her family could even wrap their minds around the grief. Now, 25 years later, the exact same protocol was active again. "They are moving right now, Charles," Anne said, her voice dropping into a low, gravelly whisper that cut through the ringing phone. She reached into her heavy riding jacket and pulled out a set of rusted iron keys. By midday, a team of official auditors will raid the library at Althorp under the guise of an emergency historical assessment. When they find that poetry book empty, they will know you brought the letter here. Panic flooded Charles Spencer's face. He pointed a trembling finger at the cream-colored parchment resting on the table. "Then we burn it," Charles choked out, his voice cracking under the pressure. "We throw it in the fireplace right now. If they secure this letter, they will seal it under the Official Secrets Act forever. They will bury the truth, destroy her legacy, and brand us as traitors." Anne snapped her head toward him, her eyes blazing with absolute fury. "You do not burn a weapon when the enemy is breaching the gate," she barked, her voice echoing off the Spartan walls. She snatched the parchment from the desk. "Diana did not hide this letter at Althorp so it could be turned into ash," Anne said, her hands steady now. "She hid it so that when the moment was right, it could detonate." "Detonate how? You cannot simply hand a document like this to the press. High court injunctions would gag every newspaper in Britain before the ink could even dry." The palace machine owned the legal system. They controlled the airwaves. They governed the official narrative. How do you expose a secret when the court controls the medium? Anne looked up at the heavy wrought iron clock resting on the mantelpiece. "We don't need Fleet Street," she said softly. In precisely 3 hours, the entire global press corps and every senior member of the royal establishment will gather at St. George's Chapel in Windsor for the Order of the Garter ceremony. The broadcast is live. It is unedited. They cannot cut the feed without causing an international panic. Charles felt the blood drain entirely from his head. The sheer audacity of her plan was staggering. She was planning to walk Princess Diana's final hidden plea directly into the center of the monarchy's most sacred event, live on international television. Then the red phone abruptly stopped ringing. Silence slammed back into the room. The sudden quiet was 10 times more terrifying than the noise. "They are jamming the local communications grid," Anne stated coldly. "The strike team is already in motion." Before Charles could speak, the violent crunch of tires over frozen gravel echoed from the private driveway outside. It was not the slow, synchronized arrival of multiple security vehicles. It was the screaming, erratic stop of a single blacked-out Range Rover. Anne stepped over to the frost-covered window, peering out into the grey pre-dawn fog. A tight, grim smile broke across her stoic face. "He made it," she whispered. "Who?" Charles demanded, stepping toward the window. "Who did you call?" Anne turned back to him, her eyes burning with pure resolve. "The only man in this family who has the absolute right to know what his mother sacrificed," she said. The heavy oak doors of the study burst open, shattering the freezing air. Framed in the doorway, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, stood Prince William. He was completely alone. No security team, no royal equerries, no palace handlers. He had driven across frozen countryside at breakneck speed after receiving an encrypted, untraceable signal from the aunt he trusted above all others. William's eyes darted across the room, shifting from his pale uncle to the unyielding form of Princess Anne. Then his gaze dropped to the table. He saw the broken crimson wax. He saw the frantic, looping cursive of the mother he had mourned for 25 long years. "What did you find?" William demanded, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of grief and authority. Anne did not offer a gentle explanation. She simply picked up the lost letter and held it out to the future King of England. As William's fingers touched the parchment, reading the exact courtier named in his mother's final warning, a raw, devastating truth hit him like a physical strike. His mother didn't die a helpless victim. She died a tactical commander, leaving behind a loaded gun aimed directly at the men who tried to break her family. If you think you know what happened next, you are not ready for what is coming in our next video. You will see the exact, unscripted moment Prince William, Princess Anne, and Charles Spencer walk into St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, carrying this document into the live broadcast, and you will hear the specific, horrifying sentence Prince William confronted that senior courtier with, right before the cameras started rolling. Make sure you don't miss a single second of what unfolds next. Prince William stood frozen in the doorway of the Gatcombe Park study. He was breathing heavily. His hands rested on his knees for a fleeting second before he forced himself upright. The future King of England had driven himself across frozen countryside roads, tearing through the Gloucestershire fog without a single royal bodyguard or security escort. He had responded to an untraceable, encrypted distress code from the only woman in his family who never panicked. His aunt, Princess Anne. I watched him closely. The impeccable stoic armor he had worn since childhood was completely shattered. His gaze darted across the freezing room. He saw his uncle, Earl Charles Spencer, pale and shaken against the oak bookshelves. Then his eyes dropped to the heavy table. There lay the cream-colored parchment. There lay the shattered crimson wax seal. How do you prepare a son to meet the ghost of his mother? You don't. William stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing off the stone floorboards. "What did you find?" William asked. His voice was raw. It trembled with a sudden, agonizing emotion that threatened to break 25 years of enforced aristocratic discipline. Princess Anne did not offer a comforting preamble. She did not attempt to soften the blow. She simply reached down, picked up the lost letter written in August 1997, and held it out to her nephew. William reached out. His fingers trembled violently as they brushed the distinctive, frantic, looping cursive on the envelope. The silence inside that Spartan study became unbearable. He unfolded the parchment. His eyes scanned the ink, reading the desperate, calculated words penned by Princess Diana just weeks before her life was cut short in Paris. "My dearest Anne," the letter read, "they are going to try to break my boys, and I know you are the only one who knows how to survive them." The color drained entirely from William's face. He stood stock still. As his eyes reached the bottom margin of the page, reading the specific name of the senior courtier, the man tasked with stripping away his mother's warmth and molding him into an unfeeling asset of the state. The weight of 25 years came crashing down. A single, devastating tear broke past his eyes and fell onto the floorboards. It was the first time since September 1997 that the world had seen William crack. In that terrifying second, a quarter-century of false narratives crumbled into dust. His mother had not spent her final days spiraling in helpless paranoia. She was fighting. She was operating as a brilliant, fierce tactical commander. She was secretly reaching across palace divides to secure the crown's most impenetrable fortress, Princess Anne, to protect her son's soul. She knew, William choked out, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at Anne. She knew exactly what they were going to do to me, William said, his chest heaving. And she trusted you. Princess Anne stepped toward him. For 25 years, the world painted her as the unfeeling aunt who walked behind Diana's coffin without shedding a tear. But looking at her now, her legendary stoic voice cracked under the weight of buried grief. I swore to her I would not let them break you, Anne replied, placing a heavy, calloused hand on William's shoulder. She looked him dead in the eye. But the men who orchestrated her extreme vulnerability that night in Paris are still hiding in the deep shadows of this institution, Anne warned. And the encrypted lines confirm they already know we have her letter. Charles Spencer stepped into the shaft of grey morning light. What do we do? Charles asked. Anne turned toward the mantel clock. The hands were ticking relentlessly. In less than 2 hours, the monarchy's grandest spectacle of the year was scheduled to begin at Windsor Castle, the Order of the Garter ceremony. Every international news outlet was already lined up outside St. George's Chapel. The broadcast would be live, unedited, broadcast to hundreds of millions of homes worldwide. The senior courtiers, the very men in grey Diana had named, would be standing right there on the chapel steps, managing the royal procession. They believed they had silenced Diana forever. They believed her legacy was buried. They had no idea that her final, undeniable weapon was sitting inside a Range Rover, heading straight for Windsor. They expect us to hide, Anne said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, chilling register. They expect us to negotiate behind closed doors, where they hold all the cards. We do not negotiate with the shadows. William looked down at the parchment in his hand. He folded it carefully. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, right over his heart. His tear-streaked face hardened. The grief evaporated, replaced instantly by pure, unadulterated royal steel. He was no longer just a grieving son reading a lost letter. He was the future king. Then let them watch us burn their shadows down, William said. The trap set 25 years ago was about to spring, and the House of Windsor would never be the same. If you think you know how this historical confrontation ends, you are about to be blown away. In our final video, you will see the exact moment Charles Spencer, Princess Anne, and Prince William step out of their vehicle at St. George's Chapel, bypass the palace handlers on live television, and hand the lost letter directly to the institutional leadership. And you will hear the exact 3-word ultimatum Prince William whispered to the chief courtier that forced an immediate, quiet surrender behind closed doors. You cannot afford to miss what comes next. The procession at Windsor Castle was scheduled to begin in less than 12 minutes. A massive wall of international press cameras lined the stone courtyard outside St. George's Chapel. Broadcast trucks hummed softly in the distance. Satellites beamed live feeds to hundreds of millions of homes across every single time zone on Earth. Palace handlers in crisp morning coats glided across the cobblestones like well-rehearsed performers, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. They believed this was just another ceremonial event. They were dead wrong. A single dark Range Rover pulled up to the private south entrance of the chapel, bypassing the official motorcade protocol entirely. No equerries moved to open the doors. Inside sat 3 people holding a 25-year-old secret that had the power to tear down the carefully guarded walls of the institution. Earl Charles Spencer, Princess Anne, and Prince William. I tracked every micro-movement from the moment that heavy passenger door clicked open. The energy on the cobblestones shifted instantly. A senior courtier, the exact official, whose name was scrawled in desperate ink at the bottom of Diana's lost letter, stepped forward to intercept them. He wore an expensive morning suit, his face an unreadable mask of bureaucratic authority. He stepped toward William's door, attempting to issue a discreet instruction meant to divide them. He wanted William isolated. He wanted him separated from his aunt and uncle, before the live broadcast cameras caught them together on the chapel steps. William did not move. He looked directly into the courtier's eyes. Did he panic? No. William stepped out of the vehicle and stood shoulder to shoulder with Princess Anne and Charles Spencer, right in front of the lens, right in front of the global audience. The courtier froze. Panic flared in his eyes. He knew the strict rules of royal public relations. He knew the strict rules of royal public relations. He knew the strict rules of royal public relations. He knew the strict rules of royal public relations without creating an international media crisis. He was completely trapped. Inside, William said, his voice dropping into a low, razor-sharp register. The three of them escorted the senior courtier into a private holding room, just off the chapel vestibule. It was a small, stone-walled room, mere feet from the live broadcast floor, completely hidden from the press corps. The heavy oak door shut with a dull, final thud. Silence slammed into the room. The air felt freezing. Without saying a single word, Prince William reached inside the breast pocket of his jacket. He pulled out the cream-colored parchment. The broken crimson wax seal caught the dim light of the holding room. He unfolded it slowly. He held the letter inches from the chief courtier's face. "Read it," William commanded. The courtier's eyes darted across the frantic, distinctive cursive of Princess Diana. When his gaze landed on the bottom margin, where his own name was written alongside her explicit warning about a campaign to strip her son of empathy, the blood drained completely from his face. His hands began to shake. His jaw dropped, but no words came out. 25 years of hidden maneuvering collapsed in less than 10 seconds. He was staring at proof that Princess Diana knew his exact mandate before she died. He was staring at evidence that had been preserved in the dark for a quarter of a century. And he was staring at the future King of England holding the ultimate leverage. "You resign today," William said softly, every word laced with lethal precision. No press releases, no special honors, no quiet lateral transfers. You exit this property right now, and you never step foot inside a royal household again. The courtier looked over at Princess Anne, desperately searching for an opening. He found nothing. Anne stood like a fortress, her arms crossed over her chest, her piercing gaze radiating 25 years of silent, vindicated anger. "Or," William added, stepping closer, "I walk out onto that broadcast floor right now, hold this original letter up to the central broadcast camera, and read my mother's final words live to 300 million people." The courtier's shoulders slumped. His power was gone. The shadow network had been broken. Without uttering a word, the official turned around, unlocked the side service door, and disappeared into the shadows of the corridor forever. He was gone, neutralized, not through tabloid gossip, not through legal battles, but through the undeniable, preserved truth written by a mother who refused to let them destroy her children. Moments later, the massive oak doors leading into the main nave of St. George's Chapel swung open. Prince William, Princess Anne, and Earl Charles Spencer walked into the church side by side. The live broadcast feed caught the three of them moving in perfect, unbroken synchronization. To the millions watching around the world, it appeared to be an inspiring image of royal tradition and family unity. To the insiders who understood the real story, it was a total, irreversible shift in the balance of power. Look at the psychological reality of what happened inside that chapel. For 25 years, history painted Diana as a fragile, tragic figure who was outmaneuvered by an unyielding institutional machine. That narrative was completely destroyed. Diana was not a helpless victim. She was a tactical commander. She recognized the one person inside the royal gates who possessed the steel to protect her sons, and she hid her final, decisive weapon where no courtier could ever find it. The unbroken crimson wax seal that sat untouched inside a volume of John Donne's poetry for a quarter of a century had finally fulfilled its mission. William had his mother's truth, Anne had her vindication, and the shadow courtiers were exposed once and for all. I can tell you that the emotional weight hanging in the air that morning was unlike anything I have ever investigated in the history of British royalty. The ghost of Princess Diana had finally spoken, and her words reshaped the monarchy forever. If you think this is where the mystery ends, you are missing the most terrifying piece of the puzzle. Because when Charles Spencer returned to the library at Althorp House late that evening to lock away the poetry volume, he noticed something else jammed behind the wooden paneling of the shelf. It was a second, locked leather folio containing handwritten bank transfers and off-the-books wire receipts dated exactly 6 days before the Paris crash. And in our next video, I will reveal the shocking, high-ranking identity on those financial records and the unredacted paper trail that exposes what really happened in that tunnel. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what we uncover next.